I think so. I was going to mention the luncheon coming up March 9th.
What it,
Luncheon, March 9th.
March 9th. We're kind of packed with events here. So March 9th, we're having our quarterly luncheon at the Ale House on Yamato Road on the south side, across from the old main site. Okay? All right. I have one more piece of administrative. Jack McWalter, who is, I don't know if any of you know Jack. Jack and I worked together when before in the late 80s. And Jack is now involved in a Citizen Watch event, a political event where it's making people aware of what's going on in the city of Boca and whether that's good or bad. And Jack is involved in that. He's agreed to join I won't say the board, but he's agreed to join the club and be an active member to help us with some of the organizations. And Jack wanted to give a couple of words about what he does in the event. You're interested in getting involved and seeing some of that. Jack will just give a couple-minute description about what he does.
Okay, I'm Jack McWalter. I've been here in Boca since 1978. I retired 10 years ago after 32 years. I'm basically a political activist, if you will. I'm working with some other IBMers on a website called Boca Watch, and we've dedicated the rest of our lives to really try and control development in this community. There are incensed that our parks are being not being used properly, and all sorts of issues. I bring some unique skills to this to the group that I was asked to share in future meetings. Is that we go to all the planning and zoning meetings, we go to the city council meetings, we're very aware of what's going on in the city, and we're activists. We get involved, and I think that the value that I can bring to this group is that if you have any questions about issues, we can, there's 25 of us, we have about 25 volunteers, we put out about 400 articles, we have 20,000 viewers, and we can become a great source to this group for information that I can disseminate to you as you ask for. We are very, very active and sincere and very concerned about overdevelopment and traffic in this community. And we just thank you for letting me join your group and let me be active to inform you as best as possible.
Yeah, we know now, I think as many of us here, our biggest concern is traffic, growth, up, but we should have a max height, not that max is up. Where is this thing?
This is criminal. What's going on in this town? Okay, we have, the limit was 100 feet for buildings in this town. It went to, without anybody hardly know, it went to 160 feet downtown for the Tower 155. And here's the kicker that people don't know about. This is the most insensitive. This has angered me so much. There's a developer that wants to come to this town and build 4 buildings that are 460 feet tall, 300 taller than the ones that we're building now, which is outrageous. Now, the tall buildings are not there. The problem is there's no parking. Where are all those thousands of people downtown that are putting their cars? Where's the traffic's going to be impacted? The Midtown rezoning deal over here on Military Trails. Anybody live in that area? They want to put 2,500 units over there. 2,500 units. The largest rezoning in the history of Boca Raton, probably South Florida. That's 5,000 people. That's 5,000 cars. I mean, it's just, so, excuse me for getting so angry.
How many times a minute will more toilets be flushed? And how much water?
Well, you hit it right on the head. Let me tell you, I just put I'm active in running Boca Watch. And go out there and see my commentaries. I just did one on the kids. We estimated the number of kids coming into this community. About 10,000 people are on the drawing board for the developments that already been approved. Where are all those kids going to go to school? We just had Calusa overcrowding my grandchildren. One of my grandchild the parents got a letter saying they had a bus for 5 miles. I mean, where are we going to put another couple thousand kids? You know, the education system is going to be overly taxed. I guess my point is, and I apologize for you running over, right? We're just very concerned about the way the county's going, we would just like more thoughtful managed development that the people know about. That's what we're trying to say.
Yes, Governor last, I can give you the email address and the website.
Local Watch, BOCA, WATCH.org. You say Local Watch and springs up. We got 400 articles out there. I put out about 10 commentaries.
What's your last?
MC, WAL, TR.
This concern supposedly together is the 20th Street that will intersect. So they could have bought them, the boats and trailers, and they go down the little road by the CVS pharmacy and turn around where the Publix trucks go behind Publix.
Exactly, I've seen the sketch. It's unbelievable. I guess our concern is when there's other IBMers that are involved. I mean, there's about 10 of us that work in this group of 25. And the city council, planning and zoning board, local will come before the planning and zoning board, provide a rendering and then public school committee and stuff. It doesn't comply with what was presented. The city council will vote for it and everything's okay until the things start being built. I can't get into details because I haven't, it's pending before the planning and zoning board. And until we see what the engineering drawings look like, I can't comment. I frankly don't like the idea until we see architectural drawings and exactly how those issues are resolved. I mean that, you shouldn't be surprised. You know, like many of us were, a lot of things that are happening in this town. I'm sorry. Any more questions?
Yeah, we should run over mayor. We should run for mayor.
Well, we got I'm working actively right now for this guy, El Sicaro, and Andrea O'Rourke. I don't know if you know either one of them. But the problem we have right now in this town is that our Mayor Haley is basically measuring the drains from Steve Abrams' office up in the commission, up in the county commission office. She's done a great job. I campaigned for her as a voucher of Steve Abrams over the last 25 years. She's done a great job. I think that ought to stop though. We got things that are absolutely criminal coming into this town. 2,500 units going over there by Military Trail. People over Open Bath and Tennis, people in Fairfield and Paradise Ponds, they didn't even know about this until just recently, until we surfaced this issue. You know, so I apologize. I'm overdoing it. I'm overdoing it. I'm sorry.
You got a little more passion.
Yeah, a little passion. Well, you know, the town. Here's the thing that is absolutely coming. Is the residents don't get to vote. You don't vote on these projects. Right. You vote, March 14th is the only vote you get. The people over in Paradise Ponds, go to the meeting, you know what they told me? He says, whoa, we're going to vote for this development. There's no vote for the development. It's nothing. When that zoning goes in, 2,500, you're done. They're done. All those developments coming in, there's not a thing you can do. You can go to city council and talk for 5 minutes, won't do you any good, because it's going to go rammed right down their throats. All the developments are going over in those areas.
If there's any benefit to vote for one person over another, put it on your website.
It is.
I don't know.
We have it out there. We have it all.
It's on that
We have it all.
recommendation.
Yeah. Well, we got 2 people running for council seat that I never heard of. I never heard of them.
And Jack,
Hang around at the end.
Jack can stick around at the end. Yeah. Maybe some people have some questions.
Yeah. Well, why don't you do this? If you have pencil and paper, take down my email, and I'll respond to all of you. Okay? And I'll write it down. I'll leave it over here.
Yeah.
I have to go to another meeting like this.
Okay.
It's Jack, J-A-C-K, 1, MC, @hotmail.com. If you send me an email, and if you have a question, I'll answer you. Okay? And I'll be, there's other IBMers, there's about 10 of us, you know, that, interesting. But, yeah, I'll be, so to summarize, I'm gonna become more active, even after the election. I'm gonna be still around, because we got another election coming up right next year. So my goal is to educate, provide education to all you folks. Whenever you ask for it, I have provided with as much knowledge that I can provide, and with all the other folks that are in my group. And I'm looking forward to working with you and seeing you all again. Thanks,
Thanks,
Jack.
Jack, appreciate it. You know, then, just take a look, if anybody goes to Pink Plaza, Pink Plaza is a perfect example of how it works. You ever try to go in there and get space with that Pink Plaza, it's almost impossible. It is almost impossible to do. And they're gonna build another building there, supposedly, maybe this is one of them, this, the old building construction, it's just crazy. The other one that's a little wild, and probably Jack is involved in, is the line, the railroad line, the passenger line from Miami to Orlando, and then Orlando to Jacksonville, and they're gonna complete this high-speed rail thing. It's going through the wilderness, and I mean, there's millions and millions of dollars that we're spending, and there hasn't even been a feasibility study of how many people would want to take this high-speed rail.
Just a way to run one.
It's just more stuff. Anyway, okay, we're a little far, we go there to you now. Okay, great.
Sorry about going over.
It's okay. Okay, without further ado. Sally, Sally, is this your third time with us? Sally is we keep going back to Sally because from a historical point of view, the stuff that she has really is very imperative and imperatively important about how our community evolved and how we got to where we got. The Al Capone stuff, the Gunrunner stuff. What was the other one, Sally? I said this was in between this one and the other one. Al Capone. Yeah, the Leno and Louise, and yeah, what was this one? It was Gunrunners or oh, it's another album. Okay. So I'm just telling you, this stuff is a lot of fun. Sally's got some publications of the books of hers that you can buy there on the table. The session's going to take a while. It's multimedia. It's going to be done with the visuals and also with some audio. We've turned around the speakers this time so you can kind of hear this a little bit better. If it's too loud, speak up. We'll turn this down because the crowd is kind of small. All right? Okay, Jim, Sally, you ready? Sally Lane? On yourself. You want some more volume on that? Anybody wants some more volume on the microphone? Yes. Yes. Yes.
Testing.
Okay, that's about it.
All right, that's about it. Let the run with that. Anyway, I'm delighted to be here. A little bit of background very briefly. I wrote for the Sun Central for 4 years. I also wrote and still write for South Florida area magazines. It was because of my stories that I wrote in the Sun Central that I started writing historical books. My first one was the story of the book Return on the Airfield, and that is a good one that we might want to do sometime. Anyway, so let's talk about this. This is the story of South Florida during the Prohibition era. And for those of you that I'm seeing standing between here and there, if you want to move from one way or the other, you're good. You're fine. Okay, so I write historical nonfiction and historical fiction, and I also write biblical mysteries. And they are over on the table, in case you want to take a look. This is kind of a collage of what I've done. My latest book is The 12th Stone, which is the third in the series of my Shea Baker Biblical Mystery series. And so let's talk about how Boca Raton got started in the well-known business among all the other people. When I was researching the book, the history of Boca Raton, I ran across a very small article about Jake Boyd and the Runrunners. And I thought this was so funny. I said, there's got to be other stories like this. It was poignant and funny at the same time, because prohibition was not a fun thing at the time. A lot of people died during that. But at any rate, Jake Boyd was out on A1A, surveying this, to lay the street. And while he was there, he was over on Lake Boca Raton. And this is what he said. I had a crew surveying the Boca Raton beach area, which must have preempted the signaler's call, because a boat entered the inlet of Boca Raton and beached in the lake just opposite my transit unit. The boatman recognized his mistake and took off on foot, leaving the boatload of choice beverages in their gun sacks. I was accustomed to spending Saturday nights with friends in Palm Beach, and while still pondering, I took along a case that week in case of the booze that we had found in the boat, and distributed samples among appreciative friends so they could help me meditate. On Monday morning, he had taken all of his booze and put it in his garage before he went up to see his friends. On Monday morning, when I opened my garage, the liquor was all gone, without a trace, and I got an anonymous phone call thanking me for taking care of it and offering a sure source of supply in the future. I got to know the anonymous caller pretty well with the passage of time. So Jake Boyd was my first introduction to the rum runners and the booze that came into South Florida during Prohibition. So I started researching it, and I found some wonderful stories, so that's what we're going to learn today. You will see a number of videos. They were produced by W.L. Arnett, and several years ago, I was fortunate to have this book and some other stories, not in this book, put into a production by W.L. Arnett. It was called South Florida Connection and Prohibition in South Florida Connection, and we're going to see excerpts from that during this presentation. So the first thing we want to do is take a look at what was happening in our country before Prohibition actually took place, and what was going on, and how did it actually happen. We're not getting sound.
Are
No, yeah, I'm not getting one either.
you?
It's not coming out. Yeah. We didn't try it when we put the projector on there.
Let's go straight to this.
No. So sorry, really good.
How was on?
Okay. Well, at any rate, we'll carry on until we can actually do this. In the early part, before Prohibition actually took place, there were several groups that came together in order to be a political action committee. They were probably the first political action committee. This was in the early 1900s. There was the Women's Christian Temperance Union. There was the Anti-Saloon League. And there was one other group that got together and they decided that they were going to form a coalition to back politicians who wanted to support prohibition. We're not getting that. No.
We checked this. We purposely checked this beforehand. Is the volume of the meter down? That's exactly what I was. What's it at? What is it, 7, 2, 3?
You can actually go down. You should be able to do this here.
You want to try the red jacket instead of the green?
Red Jackson, for,
No.
if you want to decide,
A lot of stuff is turned on, you can see from the mixer.
you want to go to the jack one now,
We tried it, it came out before, it's
Oh,
not.
no, we did, when the projector was hooked up, we did not try it.
Yeah, but the projector's going straight to there, this is a separate one.
See, we don't, that's a review, so it's something within the actual file.
Oh, that's all I can say.
Okay, then forward.
You know what? I'm gonna. Oh, well, no, that's. I'm so sorry. There's so many, there are so many others. I don't even know.
Oh, it's good.
Are you still recording? I can edit this. I can't lose the people. I can't shut down the people already. We can call this up later. That's a drink.
So, there were three groups. They all band together as this pack. And they decided that they were going to support the political candidates who were for education. And that's basically what they did. One of the first people who came to South South Florida, or who came to the area and who decided that she was going to be one of the leaders of this group was a woman by the name of Carrie Nation. Well, Carrie was, had been married to a physician who was an alcoholic, so she had experienced firsthand the problem of alcoholism. They got divorced, and then she married a pastor. Well, she also had a daughter during this time. And Carrie served during the WCTU, Women's Christian Temperance Union. And she was one of those people who was gung-ho for prohibition because of the experience that she had. So she used to go to the saloons with her hatchet, and she used to take apart the saloons and run them out. And they also used to hold vigils outside of these saloons and pray for prohibition to take effect. And to pray for the men, because at this time, only men were allowed in the streets, women were not allowed. And so they actually closed down thousands, tens of thousands of these saloons prior to prohibition. Well, she felt that her campaign, where she literally took a hatchet, she called it agitation, and she went into these places, and she actually came down to Miami in 1906, and she told them that she was going to clean up the wicked town. And in fact, a lot of the booze had been flowing into South Florida for years and years and years. So the sheriff doubted her that it was such a around town. And so on Sunday, she went out and she bought a liquor, she bought a bottle of booze and she hid it in her skirt. And when she was in front of the group, and the sheriff was there, she said, and this town needs to be cleaned up because of this wickedness. Look at this! And she pulls this booze off under her skirt and says, see, I can even buy booze on Sunday when it's illegal. So needless to say, Carrie Nation was a very formidable force during the early days of prohibition. And her name was, the original name was spelled C-A-R-R-I-P, but later on she changed it to C-A-R-R-Y with the middle initial A, meaning Carrie A Nation. And that's what she used, Carrie A Nation. Unfortunately, she died in 1911, so she didn't even get to see prohibition come to fruition. But she was a formidable force during the early days. Now, this particular slide shows that there were only two counties, Palm Beach and Dade County, originally. And Broward County was made out of the south end of Palm Beach and the north end of Dade County. But during the 1920s, of course, the beginning of the 1920s, prohibition took effect. And Nebraska became the last state to ratify it. And everything changed in the United States. Everything changed. Nassau became the gateway to the legal booze industry. Nassau was 45 to 55 miles away, the islands of the Bahamas. They were wet, obviously, and booze could be brought in very easily by boat. And that's exactly what happened. Anybody who was anybody got their boat and brought in, went across the straits and brought an Gulf Stream and brought booze into South Florida. One of the most notorious drum runners of that time was a man by the name of Bill McCoy. Bill McCoy was a 6'4" sailor. He came from Holly Hills around the Daytona Beach area and was a boat builder. And during the Prohibition era, he decided that he could make far more money running booze into the United States, and he could carry people from Daytona Beach down to the south end of the state. And so that's exactly what he did. His first run was into Savannah, and for that was paid $15,000. And we have to remember this is the 1920, 21 at the time. And the Coast Guard captains were being paid $6,000 a year. So this was quite a lot of money at that time. Well, he became the biggest rum runner from the Bahamas into the United States. One of his colleagues, actually, she was one of the people who actually sold him booze from Nassau, was a woman. Most people think prohibition was strictly a men's profession, but it wasn't. There were several women who were involved in this, and I'm just sorry to get their stories because they are really quite interesting. We had a reenactment of one of them, that was true. So, Bertram Minto was originally a stenographer from the United States, and she, a little bit later, she was employed by a British distillery. So when Prohibition took effect, the distillery sent her to the Bahamas to act as a distributor and go-between the rum runners and the distributor. So she actually sold booze to Bill McCoy and actually went on his vessel with him several times. One of the things that Bill McCoy invented was rum road. And what they would do is they would take their ships full of booze and they would sail them up the east coast of the United States, and they would kind of form a line, and they would call it rum road. And what would happen is smaller boats would come off the mainland out, and they would have to be 3 miles out because that was in international waters. So they would go 3 miles out, they would anchor their ships, and they'd wait until the small convict boats to come up and unload the booze from their ships and then take them inland. And they did this because they didn't want to be caught. It was okay for the little guy in the contact boat to be caught, but he, as a distributor, was not caught, or as a supplier, was not going to be caught. And so that's what they would do. So it wasn't just the Bahamas. Cuba was also running rum into the United States as well. And one of the most interesting people was Marie Waite. It was called Spanish Marie. I'm going to tell you her story a little later. So here's Bill McCoy and his boat, the Irapuza, and he would be transporting the booze into the United States. He did that for about 5 or 6 years until he was caught. His boat was confiscated. He spent about 9 months in federal prison. And when he got out, he went back to his boat building practice, but he died later in 1971. Here's Gertrude Lithgow, Queen of the Bahamas. She was quite an interesting person. She used to carry a pistol, and if anyone got in her face, she would brandish it, and they would leave her alone. She was went along with Bill McCoy on one of his stations off of Rum Road, and I think they got into a little bit of an affair there. Later on in their life, they went back together very briefly, but obviously they had something in common during that time. She was, let me read a little bit about what exactly, how she was described. She was a tall, slender girl with black hair and a brain as steady as her own dark eyes, and a history that was nobody's business. She came to Nassau as agent for Hagen McTavish Scotch whiskey. No one knew from where. She made no secret of her background, but she told an entirely different tale to everyone who asked. She was born in California. She had been born in India. She was a gypsy. She had been raised in the Middle West. You could take your choice. Nassau was not the best place in those days for attracting unprotected women, but though she was the former, she certainly was not the latter. Members of the rum mob who drew their own conclusions concerning her and then tried to operate accordingly. Probably would recall the breathtaking fury she could show, and one or two must remember the pistol jammed into their ribs by way of making things clear. An able, thoroughly competent girl was she, no Twittery Jane, at whom one could make passes with impunity. She expected others to mind her own business, and she attended to hers. She worked at that overtime, and in its course, she nearly ran me ragged. That was written by her. So in 1926, we had the Oyster Inn, which was the beginnings of the Boca, later became the Boca Raton Hotel. And of course, this was the building boom of the early 1920s in South Florida. The building boom was all over. It ran from Palm Beach to Miami. It was really brought Florida into the limelight during this time. And of course, the resort opened in 1926. And we also had the homes in Floresta that were also being opened during that time, that were being built during that time. And in order to sell land, you have to have boomers, because boomers, if you find enough people with boomers, they'll spend any money. And so there were lots of parties during this time. And people would be coming down, not like some of the things that we do today, come on the cruise and we'll sell you a timeshare. So during this time, there were lots of parties. People were being private liquor, and lots of transactions were taking place both in land and in actual brick and mortar homes. This was a very, very difficult time with the law and order. We had run low taking its place up the East Coast. And we also had anybody who could get in their boats and bring the rum and the booze in from Nassau and Cuba. The Coast Guard at this time was very difficult. They were understaffed, their boats were slow, they were totally unprepared for this event. So it was very, very difficult for them to even enforce it. Also during this time, there was a lot of pirating. In other words, it's easier for me to steal my books from you than it is for me to go to the Bahamas. And some of these boats, including those in Florida, would fortify itself with munitions, arms and munitions. He actually put a submachine gun on the bow of his boat. He armed each one of his crew with 45s, and he also hit a rifle in the front of his sail. And this was to ward off the pirates, not the Coast Guard. During this time, Nathan Walker Hildreth, a woman in the early 1920s, became assistant U.S. attorney. She headed the division of the Justice Department that dealt with the enforcement of the Volstead Act, which was prohibition. Can you imagine a woman in the 1920s being placed in a position like this? I always thought that it was probably the reason why a woman was put there, because the men didn't want to deal with their colleagues being tried for bringing booze in. But she was quite a formidable force. She eventually was able to get Congress to approve funding for the Coast Guard, and they actually were then able to enforce the prohibition law. This not included just taking people to court, it was capturing them on the seas. So she was able to get the Coast Guard more equipment, faster boats. The rum runners would do a lot of evasion. They throw oil in the air. They would, of course, go at night. They would play a little cat and mouse game. Somebody out here would have a boat that was in trouble. The Coast Guard would go to the boat, and they would bring the booze in. So there was a lot going on at this time, but she was a very smart woman. In fact, after she left the Justice Department, one comment was that she had worn pants to prove the president. That's how smart she was. Another woman during this time who was very interesting was Elizabeth Friedman. She came in about the same time, in the mid-1920s, because that's when the enforcement of prohibition really took hold. The Coast Guard were now up to speed, the laws were now up to speed, they had enough people, and so she entered the situation about this time. One of the things that the rum runners would do is talk in code, and they would put clandestine stations, radio stations, all throughout Florida. and they would talk to the roadrunners. Well, enter Elizabeth Freeman. Her husband, William Freeman, is considered the father of modern photography. And she, along with her husband, started reading the codes of the roadrunners and deciphering them. She started working for the Coast Guard, and she actually wrote the Coast Guard book, code book. Very, very smart woman, and was instrumental in really bringing a lot of these folks to justice with her ability to decipher codes. Remember we talked about Marie White's Spanish Marie? Well, this was Spanish Marie. She inherited her fleet of boats from her husband, whose body washed up on shore in Miami. He had been killed by the Coast Guard and accompanied the Coast Guard. She was very smart. She was a beautiful woman. She, after her husband died, she had a lot of encounters with him. But she had a very fiery temper. And it said that if she did not like you, you wound up against the country and stuck in the Florida Straits. So that was Miss Marie White. She had the fastest boats on the water. She spoke in code, mostly in Spanish, and she was able to evade the law for many, many years. One of her captains was sailing into New Orleans. He was captured. She was implicated. She was brought to court, but she told the judge a sob story and told him if he would just let her go home to her two babies that she was taking care of, she would be back in the morning for the court. Well, Marie White never came back. No, she escaped with her money, her booze, and her books. In Boca during this time, booze was obviously coming in. There was so much open coastline, it was impossible for the Coast Guard to be manned all the entire coast of Florida and to stop all the booze that was coming. But one of the things that was happening in Boca is that they were bringing in booze, and this is a photograph of a stash of booze that had been buried by this building, under this building, or outside this building. This was also a time when this building was actually a church. They figured they were safe on this, whether they looked at a church on church property, certainly not. But they did find the booze, and they were able to confiscate. Land and sea things. During this time, there was a great, of course, they were bringing it in by boat, not a problem. Everybody understood that. But they were also, it was the start of aviation, and it was the start of bringing booze in by seaplanes. Happy Chalk. Anybody fly chalks?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that was the first really commercial airline. And it ran out of Miami. And Happy Chalk started his airline in about a little bit before 1917, maybe 1915. He took a hiatus and flew in World War I. Then he came back and he ran a commercial enterprise ferrying people and cargo to and from the Bahamas. Well, when Prohibition started, he also took a couple of cases of goods back and forth as well. And some of the people that he actually took back and forth, one of them was Al Capone. Well, this was a natural for him. He obviously was going over to the Bahamas every day and bringing things back, so why not just bring in a couple of cases at the time too? So, in 1925 or 26, there was a young man by the name of Bob Hannon, Robert Hannon. He was 17 years old. He was a senior in high school in Miami. He, on the weekends, was learning to fly. He was a young man, still in school, and he was learning to fly. He was also a busboy at a local hotel. Well, one evening, Al Capone came to his hotel, the restaurant, and he actually met them. And when Al Capone learned that he was a pilot, he said, "Hey, how would you like to fly some booze?" Well, what young, strapping 17-year-old thinks that they're impervious to anything, and can do anything? So he said yes. So he lied to his parents. He told them that he was going to Hollywood to visit friends. And instead, he would take a boat over to the Bahamas. He would check out his plane, and then he would fly cargo into Biscayne Bay, into Miami. He'd unload it, and take several more trips. He'd get paid about $300 a trip. We're talking 1926 here, so $300 to a 17-year-old is like hitting the jackpot. He did this about 3 times a night, and sometimes he'd do it on Sundays. Well, one evening, he was unloading his booze, and one of the loaders said, take off, they caught us. So he took off, flew his plane up over a Coast Guard fighter that was coming in. But then he decided he was just going to be a smart. And he turned the plane around and he buzzed the Coast Guard plane. Well, they were ready for him. They had their guns out, and they shot his plane. He took a bullet to the leg. And he reached down and into his boot, and his hand came up full of blood, and he knew he was doomed. He was a young guy, he didn't want to die, but he'd been shot. That's all he remembers. He headed his plane out towards the Bahamas, and that's all he remembers. Thankfully, he actually landed on the water. They found him later. They took him to a floating doctor who was out there, who was on a floating platform that they used to warehouse booze. He was patched up by the doctor and he was sent back home. Well, now, Bob Hanley is kind of a little here. He's a rum runner. He's been shot and he survived. So you think that it would be the end of his career. It was not. His memoirs state that he ran booze for Al Capone for a number of years. At the last time, he was to land in a land plane out in West Broward, and the Coast Guard followed him. They followed him all the way up the east coast of Florida into Georgia. By this time, it was nightfall, and we learned how to feel and move there. So he picks this little farm out in the middle of nowhere. He thinks it's flat enough, and he lands his plane. Unfortunately, his heavy cargo and the furrows in the farm, his landing gear collapses. So now he's stuck out in the middle of nowhere. The farmer sees this. The farmer comes out. And planes at that time were an unusual occurrence, so the farmer comes out. He helps him unload the booze, put it in the barn. They unload all of the equipment on the plane, and they burn the plane because otherwise there would be evidence. This was a wooden plane, so the plane is burned. Well, they go in and they phone Mr. Capone to let him know that his booze is safe and that Bob Hanley is safe. And the next day, Frank Nitti comes up with the second in command of Al Capone's group. Comes up with a truck. They take the booze to Chicago, and they take Bob Hanley back to Miami. He was paid $2,000 for that trip, and that was his last time. But he made so much money, he used to stuff it under his mattress, and he bought several cars and actually paid for his college education and then some. So that's the story of Bob Hanley, who was a very young man when he got involved. Here's the Fort Lauderdale Golf and Country Club, where they used to land, who had an oral history in the Broward County Historical Society, told of a time when he landed his plane right on the golf course, started unloading it, and all the golfers ran over to the plane wanting a bottle of booze. But of course, it only took them a few minutes. There were people on hand to unload the plane very quickly. Out in the outskirts of most of the whole country, there were stills. People were making their own booze because the bottles were so expensive. So what they would do is they would have stills out there and they would sell what we would call vodka. And it was made with, the foils were made with lead, so after a while, that of course will lead you to the booze, and then of course people got very sick from that. So, everyone tried to discourage moonshiners from being out there, but they moved their stills so long, it was very difficult to find them. You have to remember that this was the Everglades back then. There wasn't anything like this today, so it was very easy to hide your still. So Al Capone comes to South Florida in about 1925, but he stays in 1928. He buys a home on Palm Island in Miami Beach, and he decides that he's going to stay here and live out his life. He's tired of Chicago. He's being run out of Chicago. It's cold and it's rainy and it's windy, and he wants the southern shores of South Florida where it's nice and warm. So Al Capone comes here, and he buys the home in Palm Island. He has a very difficult time. Where did you hear from Al Capone? Okay, great. Just, if you have not heard the story of Al Capone, I will be telling it tomorrow at 2 o'clock at the Deer Library. So Al Capone comes to South Florida, and he decides he's being harassed unmercifully. They don't want him. So he decides that he's going to come to Deerfield, and he wants to buy some land up here and build a home. So the land that he focuses on is this undeveloped area just north of Hillsborough, which we now know as Deerfield Island, but before it was Deerfield Island, we called it Capone Island. And he actually owned it through his attorney in 1930. That's what he was going to do, buy a home. He also ran what we would call a fish business. What he would do is he'd bring the goods in from the Bahamas up the full trailer to the area where the island is. And there was a packing house there. And he would pack the goods in the bottom of the barrels, put a false top over the goods, pack the rest with dry ice and fish, and he'd ship it north to Chicago on the sea. So we used to do that sort of thing. And of course, Cap's Place. Any of y'all been to Cap's Place? Good. Okay, it's a great place. It actually got started in 1928 and kind of late in the Prohibition era. But it originally was a store, and then it was enlarged to a restaurant, and of course later on it became Club Unique, and it was a gambling house. This little house in Deerfield also was expanded into a restaurant called Riverview Club. It was also a gambling house, and in the 1950s, when gambling was outlawed, it became the Riverview Restaurant, and it served food for many, many years until it was down in the 1990s. The Cap's Place obviously is still there. It is said that his Cap Knight's brother used to man the Hillsborough Lighthouse, and that he would be able to see when the Coast Guard were in the area and signal Cap and let him know what was doing. Cap used to actually tie his booze up and sink it in Lake Placid. And when somebody ordered something or you needed to go to a restaurant, you just rode the boat out in Lake Placid and haul it up. A couple of events started at the end of the 1920s really brought home the problem of prohibition. One of them was Horace Goldman, who was a runner. He also ran human cargo in the United States. But during Prohibition, he decided that he could make a lot more money with liquors than people. And many of his people landed in grounded in the Florida Straits because he'd take their money and then got out into deep water. It was not a nice man. But at any rate, Horace Alderman was out bringing liquors into Florida with a Coast Guard cutter for their crossing. They brought him on board, and somehow he was able to get hold of a pistol And he shot one of the, a government agent who was going over to the Bahamas to do some investigating on counterfeit things. And he shot him, and he was going to make all of the crew jump into the water. However, one of the crew on the Coast Guard cutter got an axe stick and stabbed him several times. Forrest Holderman was brought back to Florida. He was hung. It was a very difficult and long death because the hangman who said he could tie a knot and couldn't really tie a hangman, and he dangled there for quite a long time before he succumbed. This was one of the events that helped turn people's thoughts from prohibition. And of course, the other one was going on in Chicago. It was the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, in which Al Capone was discussed as the mastermind. And this happened in Chicago. 7 men were killed in a warehouse with a booze deal going on. That turned the tide. That and the Great Depression turned the tide to repeal prohibition. So many people were out of work. The country was in a terrible depression. And they figured that if they could bring the booze industry back in, a lot of people could go back to work. Plus the fact that it just wasn't working. It just wasn't working. A lot of good people turned to criminal activities during this time. And of course, it was also the time when the cartels and the mob in Chicago, New York, and so forth came into their own. However, during this time, now that prohibition is repealed, what is happening here is that the stills are still being run. So there's moonshine still being sold. And a number of the fellows who would run the booze to various places would gather on the weekends, and they would soup up their cars to evade the law, number one. But then they would go out into these fields and big old tracks, and then they'd race each other around the tracks. So two of these folks, some of the families were the Flock brothers and Junior Johnson. And they both of these individuals, families, also were in the bootlegging business and the moonshine business, and then illegal booze into a variety of places during this time. But they also participated in these circular, these oval races. And those oval races actually became the forerunner of NASCAR. They just took the dirt tracks, put asphalt on them, and actually became NASCAR. And our legacy is the Homestead Mining Speed. And that is kind of a capture of South Florida during the Prohibition era. And I would like to answer any questions that you have. Yes.
The start of the
1920 to 1930. Yes.
Sorry, did you cover that, whether your booze income or?
I did not.
Okay, do you know?
No.
I think, I'm not sure.
What's that?
I think it was a guy's name, they started sending booze, and he was one of the bootleggers, and he was one of the manufacturers, and he had his operation, and they began calling it booze. He turned to it, I don't know if that's right or not.
Sounds good to me.
No, it's not. I'm wondering, you know.
I don't, and I hadn't run across it. But of course, I concentrated in South Florida, and that may have been something that happened in Chicago, New York, New Jersey, that sort of thing, so I don't know. Yes? Yeah, if you had it in medicine, you could get it in medicine, and you could get a little bit in wine, but everything else was prohibited. You couldn't sell, buy, or manufacture. Yes, yes, and of course, a lot of people bought a lot of that, so that they drank it. Like drinking coffee. Any other questions?
What's the number of your money?
18 and then 19 was the repeat. Yeah. Any other questions?
Was the predominant booze,
Well, there was some coming from Canada,
yeah, so they did mention,
but South Florida was a huge conduit.
yeah.
Did you all see Ken Burns' program on PBS on prohibition? It was very well done, but it didn't even touch on the South Florida Convention, which was very surprising to me for a gentleman who is such a thorough researcher. This, our production of, from WLRN came out at the same time as his production. And we thought, oh, well, maybe we're gonna cross here, but we didn't because it never even touched on South Florida. And I was very surprised because South Florida played a huge role, I mean, huge role in bringing booze to South Florida. during this time. Yes.
Frank Jackson, got the video and working out with the presentation he was making.
Oh, of course, it probably works perfectly.
We'll be missing those videos.
Yeah, well, I'm very sorry. Very nice. They were before you came, so I could let her. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time, and if you have any other questions, I'll be glad to see you later. Thank
you. Bootlegging, liquor manufacturing, what was the other one, Sal? The other, all those other books that you have?
Oh, well.
Yeah. So I just want you to know that Sally is quite a historian about this stuff. We thought that it was going to be appropriate to sort of run with this today, but we opted not to. And we just didn't know if anybody was going to sit there with a little Roman cloak and listen to the presentation. Does anybody know, now maybe Sally has said this, so I was over there getting some food or something. Does anybody know who the first moonshiner was in the United States? Sally, do you know?
Yeah.
George Washington. Did you say George? George Washington, his last year that he was making on his estate in Virginia, supposedly he was making 10,000 gallons a year. And he was supplying the farmers in the area. He was the first bootlegger, and that's when they had a tax on liquor. All of these Scots came over from to the United States, and they began bringing in their liquor recipes using rye. And he then has a specific George Washington recipe that's still referred to today. And you go look that up. It's really a frightening piece that the ex-president was making 10,000 gallons of liquor per year and selling it from the estate. Pull up with the horse and carriage, take what you need, pay the money. Does anybody here watch Moonshiners? No? It's next to the last session, episode is tonight, and it's at 9 o'clock on Discovery. I'm telling you, it's fascinating. Sally's absolutely correct with how much liquor, in terms of alcohol overall, has played a role in the operation of this country, and the economy of this country, too. I got hooked on it about 4 years ago. I've been watching the show ever since.
I have a personal story to tell about this because I was working for IBM in Savannah, Georgia, and one of my accounts was Savannah Sugar. And they needed a report of the big containers of sugar that they had went to the government. And I said, what do we do with this? And they said, well, the moonshiners know when this stuff is being sold. And so when we can track where these big containers are being sold, we can figure out where they are and what they're doing. And of course, the moonshiners are smart enough that they can. I was just totally.
The moonshiners almost always outdo the law in terms of their creativity you mentioned something, hide in plain sight, and that's exactly what they do.
But
They
this is
have,
in the late 60s.
yes, yeah, I'm talking about this is now. They're hiding, they're transporting alcohol in, like you saw in a couple of the shows, inside of hearses, inside of churches. I mean, watch this show, you get some history on it that really will dovetail very well with what Sally has presented. I think it's a fascinating show. These guys are so dang creative. And the one guy who went legal, is now about to go out of business because he can't sell all the booze he has that he's made. He's got 10,000 cases of moonshine in this warehouse he's made. He's legal, and he can't sell it. Now, he's about to go bust and lose everything he had. With all of his life, all he's been doing is making moonshine and making more than enough money for his family. So he went legal, and this is the price. Now, I didn't see tonight's episode or next week's episode in the last 2 of the season. Maybe a buyer comes up for these 10,000 cases. But he's got a note due at the bank, and he asked for the extension already, and now nobody knows. Tonight, we'll probably find out exactly what we're gonna do. Yeah, exactly. Sally, you know, Sally, I didn't probably do Sally Bergman's justice. Sally, how many books you go through in 2015? 12, okay. Sally has 12 books, and from a standpoint of being a historian and an author, Sally very well recognized, and you can see it all the time. I see articles in the local mags, her name on them and stuff. Really a very reputable historian. And sometimes we think that it's repetitions to bring the same speaker in, but I just think that she has so much knowledge and so much experience with history that I think it's just a darn good way to broaden your, and who would have known about moonshiners unless I knew, and I got the booze thing from moonshine. So I mean, I'm not everybody on this stuff, I was just watching moonshine. You'll have a lot of fun. Sally, thank you, yes.
Moonshine is a documentary accurate or
It's a once a week, 1 hour, it's a documentary, and they pick 4 or 5 moonshiners in the Appalachians and down through the South, and they follow their behavior. There's a couple of guys right now that are going to an old sawmill, or a mill, and they're renovating the mill so they can run moonshine in the wintertime. It's below 50 degrees. Mash does not ferment. So when it goes below 50, it stops. So these guys are trying to heat the room, and they're doing these stills that they keep out of the side of the wall. I'm sorry?
This is current.
Yes, this is now. I'll tell you, that's why I'm saying this stuff is so relevant. They got guys in the revenue guys who are chasing these moonshiners, and they're busting them all they can, but the moonshiners are far more creative in terms of doing it. It really is a fun show to watch if you haven't seen it. And if you're on demand, you can catch up on all the seasons. But this season's been okay. It's not as good as the other seasons, but there's a couple of guys on there that really went back to the pictures. I didn't recognize one of the guys in the pictures, but he's old enough to be in one of those pictures on 30s and 40s. I mean, the guy's not doing well, but he's still around. So anyway, I offer you, invite you to go over to Seaside. I'm gonna buy one of the Bergman books. Next time I promise that you have Sally here. Other than about murder, we don't put out guns and bullets and stuff out here. Maybe we'll have some fake cocktails. Don't forget the, and by the way, if you want, I'm gonna invite you personally to go to the politics and if you want. You'll be my guest. I won't be able to sit there and serve you, but I will be my guest. I really appreciate it, thank you. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, the raffle. Oh, the raffle, sorry. All right, so I got like Jack and Paul, so wound up in the moose time. We got a few prizes here. Where are the? Okay. Okay. Here you go. Sure, that's okay.
1, 2, 3, 7, 8.
There you go. Keep your pick. Got a koozie? IBM, you have totes, and route, and of course, you have Mexico. All right. Yes, you, wonderful. Your choice? A cookbook or a cozy? All right, good for you. No, that's okay. You trust it. Now, this is gonna be pretty easy. I'm gonna ask Sally, why don't you pull it?
727.
Did you want anything else? This is it. Other than that, please stop and ask Sally. She's available typically after these. I'm gonna buy the rum runner book because I've gotten so into this moonshine stuff that I'm really interested in. But, thank you for coming. I hope you enjoyed it. Sorry for the technical stuff. We have that working before everybody started. My apologies. No, it's on Discovery. At 9 o'clock. And even some of the shows start tonight from the previous episode, so if you start watching it at 7, you can catch at least 2 shows, and then even after that, you can catch another one. So you don't have to go on the land. Yeah. I know that's not good.
Hang on, Jim. Good.
Oh, it's an easy way to do it. It's an easy way.